Hi. Okay, we're going to talk about 13.3 in this video, the a precursor to talking about the Electoral College. We're going to talk about the framers' original plan for setting up the Electoral College and why they were against the uh, why they were against the idea of popular elections by a popular vote. So the framers, as you can see from here, were against the selection of, let's just make this a little bigger for you. There we go. The framers were against the selection of a president by popular vote for a couple of different reasons. One, they didn't want the Congress to choose it because they felt like it was going to be it would be the president too much under the legislature, messing up the balance, the separation of powers, of course. They were against the selection of president by popular vote, mainly because of that they just didn't feel like that, which is ironic now. Which really, if you think about it, isn't very seems kind of silly today, especially what we know, and because we remember they didn't have a lot of media or information back in those times. So how would you get information across? Horse and buggy, you know, basically messenger. There was no telegrams, there was no telegraph, there was no phones, there was no electronic communication. So they believed that the selection of popular vote by would lead to this disorder, and that people could not possibly know enough about the available candidates to make wise, informed choices. This obviously seems a little antiquated today, but yet the Electoral College continues. So here was the framers' plan selecting a president as it stands. One, they would the president and the vice president chosen by a special body of presidential electors. Those we still have today. Each state has a proportional number of electoral votes based on the number of senators, two, of course, from every state, and then the representatives. So, like at lowest, you would have three. So the states only have one electoral vote, only have one representative. Smaller states. Each elector casts two electoral votes, one for each different candidate. Okay, of a president and a vice president. So first place would be the president, and second place would be the VP. Well, a couple problems emerged from that. One, as I showed you right from the screen here, we had a bit of a problem with the 1796 presidential election where we had two different parties who won the president and the vice president. John Adams, the Federalist, winning the presidency in 1796, and Thomas Jefferson, the Democratic Republican, more the states' rights, if you remember from our previous discussions, winning the vice presidency. So there was the only time in history where there's two different members of two different parties holding the presidency and the vice presidency. In 1800, you had the problem, and this discusses in 1800 we had the problem when Jefferson ran. The candidates tied. So by the Constitution, it got thrown into the House of Representatives. So they realized that the problem would become, well, either because of the way that it was set up, voting for the same party would lead to too many ties. Voting allowing one candidate for each party would lead to too many ties. So they decided, I need to pull up there we go. So they needed to fix the system. They needed to fix this system. The name for the group of people chosen who choose the vice president and the president, the name of this group was the Electoral College. So they said they needed to fix this. Okay. So what type of person did the framers envision as an elector? Again, enlightened and respectable citizens from each state that would act as free agents to choose the best qualified person to fill the presidency. Okay, so these free agents, and they were doing that. So they didn't necessarily at first were necessarily listening to the will of the people they were picking, and that was how they did it. Now we do it in such a way, of course, as we'll talk about in class, that the electors are basically supposed to be faithful to what the people want. So and they're not necessarily free agents anymore, as we'll see. But this was the original system, again, because they worried that the people wouldn't be knowledgeable enough to pick the president. So based on these problems with the election of 1796 and the election of 1800, where we had vice presidents of two different parties, and then a tie for the presidency because they were picking people from the same party as first and second. We had to change things, separating the presidential and vice presidential elections and putting them on separate ballots. And that's what they did with the 12th Amendment to change the electoral system. So, what three new elements to the election of 1800 introduced to the process? Again, party nominations, and so that way you wouldn't have that different parties being vice president and president. The nomination of presidential electors are pledged to vote for their party's presidential ticket, and the automatic casting of electoral votes in line with those pledges. Well, the problem becomes, of course, what you have is then a tie for the presidency, because of the party nominations and the nomination of presidential electors, pledging to vote for their party's presidential ticket, based on party, is going to create a tie. So they had to separate the vice presidential and presidential elections. We'll talk more about how the modern electoral college has evolved, in the coming sections.